You've heard of Tanium? Anybody? Well, if you haven't heard of it, at least you are hearing about it today. So what I wanted to do, usually I let one of my sales guys go through this part, but given the technical nature of this audience, we called an audible and decided we're just going to keep it real. So let me just kind of describe, I think, I don't know how much I need to really emphasize the problem that everybody's facing, the changes that are going on, that are affecting the way we operate technology within organizations, and especially in security. But obviously, we are failing to keep up with the pace of change. And I think this is a common theme that everybody's kind of leading you into, at least in terms of when we describe our problems. So what we wanted to do was basically solve the hardest problem there is today that's facing most organizations, and that is to be the platform that allows you to interact with all of your assets in the environment within seconds, no matter how large that environment, being able to maintain scale and speed. So when I talk about large organizations, our largest customer, well, I don't know if it's technically a customer yet. However, our largest deployment, I guess, is looking at something close to, I think, around 700,000 or 800,000 endpoints managed with a single management server, and still able to get information from all of those endpoints, typically in seconds and maybe minutes, and this is live data. So if that is of interest to you, to be able to manage very large environments within seconds, this is purpose-built for solving your problems. So basically, I guess this is kind of our marketing slide here, but in reality, it is true that we give you 15-second visibility. Obviously, the most important piece here is having reliable information when you need it, and that requires accuracy, completeness, and confidence in that data. All right. So how do we work? And I'll be real basic here. We ask questions of all the endpoints in plain English. You can kind of think of it as a Google for your entire endpoint population. When I talk about endpoints, I'm talking about all your traditional desktops and laptops, workstations, what have you, compute devices. And get those answers typically in seconds, 15 seconds or less. And then from the same interface, also have the capability to take actions to remediate, to change the running state, do whatever's necessary to that endpoint. Right, and obviously the kind of use case here, or at least why we're all gathered here, relates a lot to the security side, but the ability to interact with those endpoints in seconds, no matter how large of a scale you're working with, obviously has more applications than just security. Security happens to be the area today where time is of the essence and your margin for error is basically zero, right? You make errors and that's how you are breached. And we see, in our company, a lot of these cases day to day. So just to kind of help orient in your mind what our software is, because given that we are a platform at our core, it is a little bit difficult sometimes to wrap your mind around how we're basically breaking physics here. But at our core is the platform. This is what we call the Tanium core. This is what provides us the ability to issue questions and interrogate those endpoints, get that information, and also distributes the messages and the actions, all the command and control type signals to those endpoints to actually change the running state and put it back into whatever the expected state is, whether that be getting rid of malware or simply configuration. And then on top of this, we have purpose-built modules that are really being built from input by the field and by customers. Whatever is most in demand, we've kind of built capabilities to address the workflows and the activities that are associated to those individuals in a company that are responsible for these types of areas, right? At the end of the day, I'm a former, actual sysadmin and network admin, but I've been working in software for the last 10 years. My purpose, my higher calling, I guess, is to ease the burden of what I experienced when I was working as a sysadmin and a network admin. I can't say that I'm a huge security expert or anything like this, but fundamentally the problem has always been how do you interact with such a large-scale environment that we're faced with today, which is expanding more and more and growing in complexity while keeping your risk low, right? Fundamentally, that's what we're all striving to do and, make money for the business, but it makes our lives easier. So these products are really built to address those flows. So I know everyone's probably, Jack, some of my colleagues in the room here have usually at this point faced a lot of skeptical expressions when we claim that with a single server we can manage hundreds of thousands of endpoints in seconds with live data, not data that's been collected and scraped off a database. The primary difference, and I'll just summarize what you're seeing here, is that traditional solutions are using communication between the endpoint and a server, something that controls them, their manager. And that's the way that all of software is constructed today. However, what we've done here is to address this specific challenge, which is fundamentally, Mary, everyone here so far today has talked about it. It is impossible to protect or mitigate the risk and remediate what you don't know or what you have no visibility to. So we wanted to ensure that we could communicate with every endpoint very quickly, and to supplement or I guess augment the communication that happens between endpoints and their management server. We are using agent-to-agent based communication. So it's an agent-based technology where we reduce the amount of communication you have with your manager, and instead you work more in a collaborative fashion with your peers. That's basically what's happening here. And because of this model, and I'm sure some of you have already started thinking about BitTorrents and things like that, when you have peer-to-peer communication, you have extremely, extremely fast acceleration of your ability to actually propagate kind of information throughout your entire population. So that's kind of the secret sauce behind why we see something close to about 1,000 to 10,000 times faster speed gains than any other product in this space. And that's not a number I'm just making up right now. So the best way to kind of show you is to obviously go into demo. So what I have kind of prepped here is our interface. Now, I can't say we have the prettiest of interfaces at the moment. It's work in progress. Our goal wasn't to please the eyes, it was to please the requests that everyone has for information. I don't know how many of you have either requested information or are asked to provide information and have struggled to do so in a relevant time frame, which is the struggle today with security information, security-related information. If you can, here, I'm going to actually, never mind. Hopefully you can see. At the top of the screen, I'm going to go through just the general ask, no, act kind of behavior, and this is just the generic way that we operate. Everything that the product does under the hood is based on asking questions, getting answers, and then taking some type of action. But I'm able to ask questions like, what are the computer, sorry, I'm typing with one finger. Computer names and operating systems in my environment. I don't want to type the whole word environment. And what Tanium is doing is there is a natural language type parser component, which is really not to be a gimmick, but rather, again, the goal being if I were in your shoes and I had to do some work, or if someone wanted some information, rather than having to do it myself, I can just tell them, why don't you just go ask it yourself. You don't really need to train anybody to ask questions or search, right? No one trained you how to Google things. You just got a text box and you started typing in questions and you got answers. that was the magic of it, right? But obviously we are using keywords to kind of look at what is it that you're actually asking for. And so let me just expand the zoom a little bit. You can see here that it's realized that I'm really looking for computer names and operating systems. And so it's formulated a set of questions that are syntactically correct, meaning it's something that our endpoints understand how to answer. And then when we actually issue this question, which should be going on, but I might have... there we go. These endpoints right now are actually connected to the management, so this is a live environment. They are, at the moment that you ask a question, they are then producing an answer. Meaning we're not pre-caching, pre-calculating, storing, streaming, any information. When I ask the question is when the endpoint answers it. Because in this day and age, time is of the essence. You have to first be able to retrieve the information, and you have to acknowledge or know or be confident that that information represents the state of your environment at the time you ask. It doesn't really help at the moment you have a breach to have information from last week or even hours ago, if it's an incident that's going on at this current moment. So in the bottom corner here, you can see, I'm blocking it probably, but there's about 1,200 systems or so. This environment kind of fluctuates between about 1,200 to 1,500 systems. But within seconds, I was basically able to get a hardware inventory, right? I mean, essentially, this is what I asked for. At the same time, I can, we have some basic filtering and, sorting of data as you would expect for any kind of table-based result. But I can take this data and I can kind of drill down on the data if I want. So let's say I select all the items I see on here, and I want to ask a follow-up question because I like to work at the speed of my thoughts. I don't like to work at the speed of whatever tool I have to use. And I may be curious, again, because this has happened to me quite often as well, which is I produce a report. Someone asks me for that same report with some other information that wasn't on there, and then you have to go collect it again. So oftentimes the fundamental pieces of information that you're looking for are things like hardware inventory, and then if I look for installed applications, now I'm asking for software inventory. Now, in most large organizations, asking these two questions seems to be a challenge to answer. You're kind of usually spinning up a project or something similar to actually hire some outside services to help you actually go computer to computer and get this information. We were able to give you a hardware software inventory of your entire environment. Again, within seconds here. Looks like I only have about actually, I don't know how many Windows systems, but I can see here, obviously, the Tanium agent, or client is what we call it, is in the environment. There's a bunch of other software that's considered installed on these endpoints. Obviously, from a security perspective, I'm looking for outliers. So I'm going to start to do, or start to look at things like where are all my one-offs, right? I mean, this is really basic, but to establish a good strategy around your defense in depth, it kind of begins with, like, do you have your hygiene, your just fundamental hygiene in place? Because, I mean, even there was a report that Brian Krebs just released recently on the analysis on, like, the target hack, right? Which was a fundamental flaw in just basic hygiene, which he attributes to things like not segmenting your secured zones, weak passwords or passwords that are very common. I mean, these fundamental things still seem to be a challenge everywhere. But hardware and software inventory, again, fundamental pieces of data. Prior to this job, I worked with a lot of CIOs to help them understand how to efficiently run the operations. Most of my customers are the global FIs in the area. So, when I asked their lieutenants, can you provide for me a hardware and software inventory, because this is fundamental to for me to produce the kind of information I need to produce for you, along with your general ledger and some other information. For some reason, hardware and software has always been the most difficult piece of information to get. And this is, I don't know how to stress it, but if you don't know what you have in your environment, it's hard to understand how you could possibly secure what you think you have in your environment. But what we're aiming to do is kind of show you the truth about your environment. What do you have? And obviously, if you're engaged in activities to, align what technology is deployed in your environment, because you have internal technology lifecycle standards, having software inventory, operating system information is all very interesting. From a security perspective, let's say I am interested in understanding more volatile data, such as what is actually running in my entire environment, right? So I can easily just kind of pivot on that data again and instead of installed applications, I'm just going to create a question on the fly here. I'm going to ask about what are all the running processes with their associated signature or MD5 hash, which is kind of common. This is then going to take the subset that I've selected. I've drilled down on the data, and now I've asked across all my Windows endpoints in my environment, provide for me every single running process and the hash value associated to that process, because the FBI, someone from iSight was in here earlier, everyone who produces these indicators of compromise and threat intel are slamming your email inbox with, watch out, you got, these are some bad signatures you should be looking around for, and you have a ton of this information that is kind of been somewhat useful in understanding how insecure things are. Unfortunately, it's been difficult to actually make that data actionable, that intel actionable, right? There's no point in sharing information if you can't actually do anything with it, can't analyze it. So what I've done here is basically pivoted and showed you these are all the running processes across every managed endpoint and the associated MD5 hash. So at the moment of a breach, if you're wondering whether you have someone in your hundreds or tens of thousands of endpoints running a particular, communicating with these endpoints to also distribute data and files. So let's say you realize that this is a bad hash. Like you found out this particular one is a problem and this one's a problem. What are you going to do about it? Well, typically you ask the ops guy, can you please, I'm going to give you some bourbon or pizza or whatever it is. If you could just push this through right now for me real quick. So I'm not trying to subvert their authority over the endpoints, but if they were using the same interface, you're looking at the same information, they could simply come in here, given the right role-based access that we provide, they could go ahead and say, I want to deploy an action. That action, based on this process, could be to uninstall a piece of software, kill that process, alert the user, pop up some other, I'm not sure what happened there, pop up some kind of message in front of them so they can interact with it. Whatever that action may be, perhaps I want to quarantine it as if it were network type access control quarantining, but instead we're effectively doing that quarantining on the endpoint because we can talk to it right away, and we can block off all network access so that that endpoint can only continue communicating with our management server and no one else. That way we maintain control and no one else. Okay.
Any questions?
Oh, okay, yeah. Are there any questions at this point?
So the Tanium server needs access to all of your network zones.
Yeah, so the question was whether Tanium requires access to all the network zones. So I guess, are you asking more in terms of which direction the communication is happening?
On that slide where you have peer-to-peer and then going to the Tanium server and all the different walls that were all over the place, it looks like that server has access to every network zone. Yeah,
so the way to think about the model, and that slide I've been meaning to update for a long time because it's a little bit misleading. The communication, you can think of it kind of like your email server, right? Like when you have a laptop, your computer initiates a connection to a central repository or central system to interact with. That's our management server sits there. It accepts all the communication. Now, the endpoints themselves communicate with each other. We have some default kind of segmentation that allows those endpoints to figure out for themselves dynamically who they can communicate with within their local area network, within their local segment. So we, by default, kind of block it off into Class C size private addresses, and we can always influence the way that they will kind of chain themselves together. But we leave it up to the endpoints to decide how and when to do that based on whether they notice some kind of communication issues. Yes?
Agent-based technology, how do you deal with rogue assets in the network?
That's a great question. So because they are agent-based technologies, and because we're really the only ones that have agent-to-agent communication, the agents are actually aware of their surroundings. So kind of situational awareness in an event, right? So they are aware of who are the other Tanium agents that sit besides them on the same local segment. Anybody that they realize is not part of the Tanium family or mob, whatever you want to call it, they will snitch on them basically so that we can have visibility into what are the unmanaged assets within the network, right? So these are all the endpoints that sit side by side with endpoints that we currently manage. However, we have used the agents themselves to detect whether those endpoints that are live on the network are actually running Tanium or not, the Tanium agent that is. And if not, then we have the ability to start tackling why is it that we don't have these under management. Now, some of these may be like printers and other like network connected devices, which we currently don't manage. We're most concerned with compute endpoints. So these are traditionally the end user devices other than mobile right now, and infrastructure devices. Now, I guess in my demo environment there's not too many right now, but this is one of the huge benefits as opposed to other solutions that don't necessarily tell you what you don't know, right? They just tell you what you have configured them to look at, and they tell you, all right, well, so this is what you wanted to look at, so I'm going to give you information on that. However, it's an incomplete story, basically. You have blind spots that you have no information on, and these could be completely compromised hosts that represent just jump hosts that adversaries are using to attack your network or your other endpoints.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.